What happens when a father's love becomes a prison of lies? When a child's true abilities are buried under years of deception? Today's story will shock you to your core. Please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who need to hear them. The rain hammered against the towering windows of the Cross mansion like angry fists demanding entry, each drop carrying the weight of secrets that had festered in this house for 8 long years. Benjamin Cross stood motionless in his marble-floored study, 32 years old, but carrying the burden of decades in his steel-grey eyes that had grown cold from years of calculated deception. His manicured fingers drummed an anxious rhythm against the mahogany desk where stacks of insurance documents lay scattered like fallen autumn leaves, each page representing millions of dollars built upon a foundation of lies so monstrous that even he sometimes forgot where the truth ended and the performance began. The study itself was a monument to wealth and power, with leather-bound books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves that had never been read, oil paintings of stern ancestors who seemed to judge him from their gilded frames, and a Persian rug worth more than most people's annual salaries. Yet for all its opulence, the room felt hollow, as if the very walls understood that everything within them was contaminated by the toxic secret at the heart of the Cross family legacy. Mr. Cross. The voice belonged to Maya Rodriguez, 24 years old, and still adjusting to the Gothic grandeur of her new workplace that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. She stood in the doorway clutching a medical file against her chest, her nursing background from Chicago General making her question everything she'd observed during her first 3 days in this house of shadows. Her dark eyes, inherited from her Mexican grandmother, who had taught her to trust her instincts above all else, swept across the room, taking in details that didn't add up to the story she'd been told about the Cross family tragedy. "I need to discuss Ethan's care routine," she continued, stepping carefully into the room despite every instinct telling her to retreat. There was something about Benjamin Cross that reminded her of the predators she'd encountered during her years working in urban emergency rooms, men who wore expensive suits to hide the violence lurking just beneath their polished surfaces. Benjamin didn't turn around immediately, instead continuing to stare through the rain-streaked glass at his son sitting motionless in the garden pavilion. 8-year-old Ethan appeared like a ghost against the ornate stone bench, his sandy hair catching what little light filtered through the storm clouds, his small frame so still it seemed as if he'd been carved from marble himself. The boy's supposed blindness kept him isolated in a world that Benjamin had carefully constructed, a prison disguised as protection that had cost more than just money to maintain. What about it? Benjamin's voice carried that familiar edge that had intimidated countless business rivals during hostile takeovers, the same tone he'd perfected during years of board meetings where weakness meant financial death. Dr. Morrison's instructions are absolutely clear and not open to interpretation. Ethan is blind and severely autistic. He requires minimal stimulation, constant supervision, and strict adherence to his medication schedule. These aren't suggestions, Miss Rodriguez. They're medical necessities. Maya stepped closer, her comfortable sneakers silent on the Persian rug as she approached the man who controlled every aspect of his son's existence with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. She'd worked with dozens of autistic children before taking this high-paying private care position, and something felt terribly, fundamentally wrong about everything she'd witnessed in this house. The way Ethan moved wasn't consistent with the severe disabilities described in his medical files, and her trained eye had caught subtle behaviors that contradicted years of documented observations. "Sir, I've noticed some significant inconsistencies in his behavioral patterns that concern me as a healthcare professional," she said carefully, knowing that challenging Benjamin Cross required the diplomatic skills of a seasoned negotiator. "Yesterday afternoon, When I accidentally dropped a glass behind him in the morning room, he turned toward the sound with a precision that suggests spatial awareness and auditory processing capabilities that seem inconsistent with his documented condition. His reaction time and the accuracy of his directional response indicates nothing more than coincidence or trained responses from years of therapy. Benjamin interrupted, spinning around with fluid grace that reminded Maya of a cobra preparing to strike. His 6-foot frame cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the young woman whole, and his perfectly tailored Armani suit couldn't hide the tension that coiled through his shoulders like steel cables under pressure. His jaw clenched with the practiced control of a man accustomed to having his authority questioned by medical professionals who thought they understood his son better than he did. Ethan Cross was born with severe developmental disabilities that have been extensively documented by multiple specialists, he continued, moving to his desk where he retrieved a thick medical folder that looked officially imposing. The medical records confirm every aspect of his condition, from his congenital blindness to his profound autism spectrum disorder. Your job, Miss Rodriguez, is to follow the established care plan that has been developed by doctors with decades more experience than you possess. Not to play amateur diagnostician with a child whose case is far more complex than your limited background could possibly comprehend. But Maya had seen something in Ethan's movements that haunted her professional conscience, behaviors that spoke to a hidden intelligence struggling against invisible chains. The way his fingers traced intricate patterns in the air when he thought no one was watching, movements too purposeful to be random stimming. The subtle head tilts that seemed to track moving objects with impossible precision for someone supposedly blind since birth. The moments when his allegedly unseeing eyes appeared to focus with startling clarity on faces and activities around him, as if he were cataloguing everything while pretending to see nothing. Of course, Mr. Cross. I apologize for overstepping my professional boundaries, she said, backing toward the door while her mind raced through everything she'd observed. There were too many inconsistencies, too many moments where reality didn't match the official narrative. Something wasn't just wrong here. Something was deliberately, systematically being hidden behind a wall of medical documentation and pharmaceutical compliance. As thunder crashed overhead like the anger of ancient gods, Benjamin returned to his papers with the satisfied air of a man who'd successfully terminated an unwelcome conversation. Insurance settlements dating back 8 years, medical expense reports that detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars in specialized treatments, disability benefit statements showing monthly payments that had transformed a family tragedy into a steady income stream. All of it documenting the heartbreaking case of Ethan Cross, the heir apparent who would never truly inherit anything because of the limitations that defined every aspect of his carefully monitored existence. Maya paused at the doorway, her hand on the ornate brass handle as she watched the man who claimed to love his son more than life itself. But love, she was beginning to understand with growing horror, could sometimes look remarkably similar to imprisonment when filtered through the twisted psychology of absolute control. The dedication that Benjamin showed to his son's care felt less like devotion and more like the obsessive attention of a collector maintaining a prized specimen. In the garden pavilion, Ethan sat with perfect stillness, his small hands folded in his lap in a posture that had been drilled into him through years of pharmaceutical conditioning. To anyone watching from a distance, he appeared completely lost in his own unreachable world, a tragic figure isolated by disabilities that made normal childhood development impossible. But behind his carefully closed eyelids, behind the meticulously constructed mask of profound disability, something else stirred like a caged animal testing the strength of its prison bars. Something that Benjamin Cross had spent 8 years and millions of dollars trying to bury so deeply that it would never see the light of day. The rain continued to fall with increasing intensity, washing away footprints in the garden, but never quite managing to cleanse the secrets that had soaked into the very foundations of the Cross mansion. And in the gathering darkness of the storm, Maya Rodriguez made a decision that would shatter everything she thought she understood about the nature of parental love and protection. She was going to discover the truth about Ethan Cross, no matter what personal or professional costs that investigation might demand. Because some lies were simply too monstrous for any decent person to live with, and some children deserved better than being buried alive in plain sight. Maya's cramped studio apartment felt like a sanctuary of normalcy after the oppressive grandeur of the Cross mansion. But tonight, even her familiar surroundings couldn't provide the comfort she desperately needed. The stack of photocopied documents spread across her second-hand coffee table told a story that made her stomach churn with each horrifying revelation, a narrative so disturbing that she'd found herself double-checking every detail, hoping against hope that her worst fears were somehow misguided. The timeline was what first caught her trained attention, inconsistencies that jumped out like red flags to anyone with medical training. Ethan's birth certificate from Northwestern Memorial Hospital showed a completely normal delivery with no complications noted in any of the extensive documentation. Hospital records from his first 18 months painted the picture of a healthy, developing child who was meeting or exceeding all standard developmental milestones according to pediatric assessments conducted by 3 different doctors. Then, as abruptly as a car crash, everything changed when Ethan turned 18 months old. Sudden onset blindness due to rare genetic condition with concurrent autism spectrum disorder manifestation, read the medical report that had been signed by Dr. Harrison Morrison, a name that appeared with suspicious frequency throughout every subsequent document in Ethan's medical file. The diagnosis was presented as a tragic but medically sound assessment, complete with detailed explanations of how such conditions could theoretically present simultaneously in young children. Maya frowned as she cross-referenced the dates and details with her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she dove deeper into research that revealed increasingly troubling information. A simple Google search of Dr. Morrison's name brought up an Illinois Medical Board website that documented a professional history riddled with red flags and regulatory violations that should have disqualified him from treating any patient, let alone a vulnerable child. The doctor's license had been suspended twice for fraudulent insurance claims, once for prescribing unnecessary medications to elderly patients in nursing homes, and there were at least 6 formal complaints filed by families who suspected him of deliberately misdiagnoses for financial gain. Each suspension had been followed by appeals and reinstatements that suggested either powerful connections or substantial financial incentives, keeping him in practice despite his questionable professional record. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carmen, a social worker in downtown Chicago who had connections throughout the city's medical and legal communities. Found that information you wanted about Morrison. Lost his license permanently last year. Officially for overbilling Medicare, but word on the street is he was falsifying medical records for wealthy clients who needed specific diagnoses for insurance or legal purposes. Very nasty stuff. Maya's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup, the ceramic clicking against the table like bones rattling in a tomb. The pieces were forming a picture too horrible to fully comprehend, a conspiracy that involved deliberately damaging a child's life for reasons that went far beyond simple medical malpractice. She pulled up photographs of Ethan's current medication list on her phone, images she'd surreptitiously captured from Benjamin's study during her second day of employment. The pharmaceutical cocktail was staggering in its complexity and potency. heavy-duty antipsychotics typically reserved for adult schizophrenics. Sedatives strong enough to render an adult unconscious for hours. Anti-seizure medications that could cause cognitive impairment in developing brains. The combination would keep any child in a permanent fog of compliance and confusion, effectively chemically lobotomizing them while maintaining the appearance of treating legitimate medical conditions. No legitimate pediatric psychiatrist would ever prescribe such a dangerous combination to a developing child without extraordinary justification, and certainly not for 8 consecutive years without regular re-evaluation and dosage adjustments based on the patient's response to treatment. The next morning at the Cross Mansion dawned grey and overcast, with fog rolling in from Lake Michigan to shroud the estate's manicured grounds in an ethereal mist that seemed appropriate for a house built on lies. Maya found Ethan in his usual position by the morning room's tall windows, where Benjamin had positioned him to enjoy the natural light, despite his supposed blindness. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she was beginning to understand that Benjamin's every action was calculated for maximum psychological impact. Benjamin had left early for what he described as urgent business meetings in the city, providing Maya with the first unsupervised access to his son that she'd had since beginning her employment. His departure had been preceded by strict instructions that Ethan was not to be disturbed from his established routine, warnings delivered with the cold authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience from his household staff. "Good morning, Ethan," Maya said softly, settling into the antique chair positioned across from the boy's designated spot. The child didn't respond overtly, but she noticed the subtle tilt of his head, a movement so slight that anyone not specifically watching for it would dismiss it as random positioning. But Maya was watching, and she was trained to recognize the micro-expressions and involuntary responses that revealed hidden awareness in patients who couldn't or wouldn't communicate through conventional methods. She reached into her canvas bag and carefully withdrew a small music box that had belonged to her grandmother, a delicate piece from Mexico decorated with hand-painted flowers and tiny dancers that spun when the mechanism played. The sentimental value was irreplaceable, but Maya had brought it specifically because she suspected it might provoke responses that more clinical approaches had failed to generate. The music box's delicate melody filled the morning room's silence, with notes that seemed to dance through the air like butterflies, a simple folk tune that her grandmother had hummed while teaching Maya to make tamales during childhood visits to Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. The melody was designed to evoke emotional responses, to bypass cognitive defenses and speak directly to the parts of the human psyche that remained untouchable even under pharmaceutical suppression. Maya watched Ethan's reaction with the focused intensity of a scientist observing a crucial experiment, noting every micro-movement and subtle change in his posture or breathing pattern. There it was again, that almost imperceptible tracking movement that she'd noticed before. His fingers began to move in perfect rhythm with the music, tracing invisible patterns in the air that seemed to dance with the notes in ways that were too precise and purposeful to be coincidental. The movements weren't random, stimming behaviors typical of autistic children. They were deliberate, artistic, almost choreographed responses that suggested not just hearing the music, but truly understanding and appreciating its emotional complexity. "You can hear it, can't you?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silent room. "You can hear everything that happens around you, and you understand far more than anyone realizes." Ethan's hands stilled abruptly, but she saw something flicker across his face that made her heart race with excitement and terror in equal measure. It was fear, but not the simple fear of a confused or startled child. This was the calculated fear of someone who understood that they'd been caught in a dangerous game of deception, someone who knew that discovery might bring consequences too terrible to contemplate. "I'm not going to hurt you," she continued, leaning forward with the gentle intensity she'd perfected during years of working with traumatized children in emergency rooms. "But I think someone else has been hurting you for a very long time, and I think you know exactly who that someone is." The music box continued its delicate performance, each note hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Maya could feel the weight of 8 years of silence pressing down on this moment. 8 years of a child's enforced isolation and pharmaceutical imprisonment that had stolen his childhood and replaced it with a living death disguised as medical treatment. "Ethan, if you can understand me, if you can see me sitting here, I need you to know that what's happening to you isn't normal medical care. Children shouldn't have to pretend to be something they're not, especially when that pretense involves being drugged into submission day after day, year after year." A single tear slipped down the boy's cheek, followed by another, then another, until he was crying silently with the heartbreaking restraint of someone who had learned that emotional expression was dangerous. The tears weren't the random overflow of a confused or overwhelmed autistic child. They were the deliberate, conscious grief of someone who understood exactly what had been stolen from him and exactly why he couldn't fight back. Maya's breath caught in her throat as the full implications of what she was witnessing crashed over her like a tsunami of horrific understanding. In 8 years, according to Benjamin's detailed accounts and medical records, Ethan had never shown such emotional awareness or sophisticated response to external stimuli. Never demonstrated understanding of complex social situations, never indicated that he possessed the cognitive capacity for the kind of self-awareness that would make him capable of grief for his own lost childhood. But here he was, crying for reasons that had nothing to do with blindness or autism, and everything to do with being trapped in a prison built from pharmaceutical fog and paternal lies that had effectively buried him alive while keeping his body functioning just enough to maintain the illusion of legitimate medical treatment. The distant sound of car tires crunching on the circular gravel driveway sent Maya scrambling to pack away the music box, her hands shaking as she realized that Benjamin was returning much earlier than expected. She couldn't let him find evidence of her unauthorized interaction with his son, couldn't give him any reason to suspect that she was beginning to understand the true nature of Ethan's condition and the monstrous conspiracy that had created it. As Benjamin's distinctive footsteps echoed through the mansion's grand marble foyer, Maya made another decision that would escalate her investigation to dangerous new levels. Tonight, when the household had settled into sleep and Benjamin had retreated to his bedroom with the bottle of expensive scotch that he consumed each evening, she would conduct a thorough search of his private study. The truth about Ethan Cross was hidden somewhere in this house of shadows and lies, and she was going to find it regardless of the personal and professional risks involved. Every instinct told her that she was walking into a situation that could destroy her career, her safety, and possibly her life, but some moral lines simply could not be crossed without consequence. Even if it meant discovering that a father's love had become the most dangerous cage imaginable, a prison built from pharmaceutical chains and financial incentives that had transformed parental protection into systematic child abuse on a scale that defied comprehension. The boy sat motionless once again, the tears now dried on his cheeks and his carefully constructed mask of profound disability firmly back in place. But Maya had seen beneath that mask, had witnessed the intelligent, aware, heartbreakingly human child trapped inside a chemically induced fog, and she knew she could never pretend otherwise. Some secrets demanded to be exposed, no matter how powerful the people trying to keep them buried in unmarked graves of legal documentation and medical authority. The grandfather clock in the mansion's main hallway chimed midnight with brass tones that seemed to echo through the house like a funeral dirge, each note marking another minute in Maya's countdown toward either discovering the truth or walking into a trap that would destroy everything she'd worked to build in her young career. She'd waited exactly 3 hours after hearing Benjamin's bedroom door close, with its distinctive click, counting each minute like a prisoner marking days until either freedom or execution. The servants' staircase that connected the upper floors to the kitchen areas was a narrow, winding passage that had been built to keep domestic staff invisible to the mansion's wealthy inhabitants. And tonight, Maya used it as her pathway into the heart of Benjamin Cross's private domain. Her bare feet were silent on the worn wooden steps that generations of maids and butlers had used to move through the house like ghosts, unseen and unheard, as they maintained the facade of effortless luxury. Benjamin's study door stood slightly ajar, and pale moonlight streaming through the tall windows cast everything in silver shadows that transformed familiar objects into ominous shapes that seemed to watch her progress with disapproval. Maya slipped inside with the careful movements of a burglar, her heart hammering against her ribs so loudly that she was certain the sound would wake the entire household and bring Benjamin running to investigate. The massive mahogany desk dominated the room like an altar to wealth and power, its polished surface reflecting moonbeams that created an almost supernatural atmosphere in the book-lined study. Maya approached it with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space, knowing that what she found here would either confirm her worst suspicions or prove that her medical training had led her to misinterpret innocent behaviors as evidence of something sinister. The locked drawer on the desk's right side had caught her attention during her previous visits to this room, always carefully closed and secured, while the other drawers remained casually accessible. Tonight, she'd come prepared with a paperclip that she'd straightened into a makeshift lockpick, a skill learned during her troubled teenage years when she'd run with a crowd that considered breaking and entering a form of entertainment rather than a felony. The lock mechanism was surprisingly sophisticated for a piece of furniture, but Maya's fingers remembered the techniques that had gotten her into abandoned buildings and empty houses when she was 16 and angry at the world. The mechanism gave way after several tense minutes of careful manipulation, and Maya slowly pulled open the drawer with hands that trembled from adrenaline and anticipation. Inside, beneath a stack of legal documents bound with red ribbon, she found a leather portfolio that made her blood run cold with its obvious importance and careful organization. The contents were arranged with the precision of someone who understood that documentation was the key to maintaining complex deceptions over extended periods of time. Life insurance policies, multiple policies on Ethan that had been purchased at different times over the past 8 years, each worth millions of dollars and all containing clauses that paid out enhanced benefits if the insured remained disabled throughout his lifetime. The total coverage was staggering, more money than most people would see in several lifetimes, all of it contingent on Ethan's continued status as a severely disabled child who would never be capable of independent living. Beneath the insurance documents, Maya discovered disability benefit paperwork showing monthly payments from various government and private sources that had been flowing into Benjamin's accounts for 7 years. The combined income from Ethan's disability status was substantial enough to fund a luxurious lifestyle without any need for traditional employment, transforming a family tragedy into a steady stream of tax-free income that depended entirely on maintaining the child's helpless condition. But it was the medical correspondence that made Maya's hands shake with a rage so pure and focused that she had to grip the desk edge to keep from screaming. Email exchanges between Benjamin and Dr. Morrison, carefully printed and filed in chronological order, dating back to when Ethan was barely 2 years old and still showing signs of normal development that threatened to disrupt their carefully laid plans. The subject lines alone told a story of systematic child abuse disguised as medical treatment, increasing dosage recommendations for sustained compliance, ensuring behavioral consistency during state evaluations, long-term prognosis management, and pharmaceutical protocols. Each email represented another nail in the coffin of Ethan's stolen childhood, another step in a conspiracy that had robbed him of 8 years of normal development. Maya photographed each document with her phone's camera, the flash briefly illuminating words that would haunt her for the rest of her life, regardless of how this nightmare eventually resolved itself. Her hands moved automatically while her mind tried to process the full scope of what she was documenting. The boy continues to show remarkable intelligence and awareness despite current medication protocols, read one email from Morrison dated 3 years earlier. Recent neurological assessments indicate cognitive function well above average for his age group. I recommend increasing the Risperdal dosage and adding Depakote to the regimen to ensure more effective suppression of higher-order thinking processes while maintaining the appearance of treating legitimate autism spectrum behaviors. Another exchange, more recent and more chilling, discussed concerns about the new caregiver and included detailed recommendations for enhanced sedation protocols that will eliminate any possibility of the subject demonstrating awareness or responsiveness during supervision periods. Maya's stomach lurched as the full scope of the conspiracy crystallized with horrible clarity. Benjamin hadn't just been lying about Ethan's condition for financial gain. He'd been actively creating and maintaining that condition through systematic pharmaceutical abuse, using Dr. Morrison's medical authority to transform his son into a living ghost who could generate millions of dollars in insurance payouts and disability benefits while being kept too drugged to understand or resist what was being done to him. The most recent documents revealed plans to increase Ethan's medication dosages again, citing behavioral inconsistencies that needed to be corrected through enhanced pharmaceutical intervention. Maya realized with growing horror that her arrival at the mansion had triggered concerns about maintaining their deception, and they were prepared to drug Ethan into an even deeper state of compliance to protect their secret. A floorboard creaked behind her with the deliberate sound of someone who wasn't trying to remain undetected. Maya spun around, her phone still in her hand with its camera app open, to find Benjamin Cross standing in the study doorway like an avenging angel wrapped in shadows and expensive silk pajamas. He wasn't displaying the surprised reaction of someone who'd been awakened by unexpected noises. Instead, his posture and expression suggested that he'd been waiting for exactly this moment, planning for it with the same careful attention to detail that characterized every aspect of his son's imprisonment. "Curious little mouse, aren't you?" His voice was soft and conversational, almost friendly, which made it infinitely more terrifying than if he'd been shouting accusations or threatening violence. "I had a feeling you were becoming problematic from the moment you started asking questions about Ethan's care routine. Medical professionals with actual training and experience tend to notice inconsistencies that less educated caregivers miss entirely." He stepped into the room with fluid grace, closing the heavy door behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a coffin lid falling into place. The sound seemed to seal Maya's fate and confirm her worst fears about the level of danger she'd walked into by investigating Benjamin Cross's family secrets. "I know what you've done to him," Maya whispered, backing toward the tall windows as she tried to keep the desk between herself and the man who had spent 8 years systematically destroying his own son's life. "I know about the medications, about Dr. Morrison, about the insurance policies and disability payments. I know everything, and I have evidence that will expose your entire conspiracy." Benjamin's laugh was cultured and refined, the sound of someone who found genuine amusement in the naive beliefs of people who thought justice actually existed in a world controlled by wealth and influence. What I've done is protect my son from a world that would destroy him if they knew what he truly was, Maya. You think you understand the situation because you've read a few medical reports and observed some behaviors, but you have absolutely no comprehension of the forces we're dealing with here. He moved closer with predatory patience, and Maya could see something in his steel-grey eyes that was far worse than simple greed or even garden-variety child abuse. Something that spoke of obsessions and compulsions that went deeper than financial motivation, control issues that had metastasized into a form of possessive love so toxic that it had become indistinguishable from hatred. Ethan was born different, Maya. Dangerously different in ways that would terrify ordinary people if they ever witnessed his true capabilities, Benjamin continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the implied threats in every word. The medications don't just keep him calm and manageable, they keep him from becoming something that would attract the wrong kind of attention from people who would use him or destroy him to protect their own interests. He's 8 years old. Maya's voice cracked with emotion and disbelief at the twisted logic she was hearing. He's a child who should be learning to read and write, playing with friends, discovering his place in the world. Instead, you've turned him into a drugged zombie for insurance money and disability payments, stealing his entire childhood to fund your lifestyle. Money? Benjamin's expression shifted to something that might have been genuine surprise, as if the financial aspects of his conspiracy were merely incidental details rather than primary motivations. You think this elaborate deception is about money? Oh, my dear naive little nurse, you understand so much less than you imagine. The money is just a convenient side effect that helps fund the resources necessary to keep Ethan safe from forces you couldn't possibly comprehend. He pulled something from the pocket of his silk pajamas, a small vial filled with clear liquid that caught the moonlight like liquid diamonds. Maya's medical training immediately recognized the syringe and the professional quality of the pharmaceutical preparation, understanding that Benjamin had come prepared for exactly this confrontation. Ethan's mother tried to interfere once, just like you're trying to interfere now, Benjamin continued with the casual tone of someone discussing weekend plans rather than revealing details of past murders. Caroline thought she knew better than me about protecting our son, thought she could fix him by taking him to different doctors and getting second opinions about his condition. She had such strong opinions about proper parenting and letting children reach their full potential, no matter how dangerous that potential might prove to be. Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins as the implications of his words sank in with horrible clarity. What happened to his mother? What did you do to Caroline? Accidents happen, Maya, especially to people who threaten the carefully constructed stability of my household and my son's protected status. Benjamin replied, with casual indifference that was more chilling than any dramatic confession could have been. Car crashes are surprisingly common among people who drive while distressed about family problems. Caroline was so upset about our disagreements regarding Ethan's treatment that she wasn't paying proper attention to road conditions on that rainy night when her vehicle went off the bridge into Lake Michigan. The room fell silent, except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock echoing through the mansion's corridors, marking seconds that felt like hours, as Maya realized she was face to face with a man who had already committed murder once to protect his secrets and was clearly prepared to do it again to maintain his son's imprisonment. She clutched her phone tighter, knowing that the photographs she'd taken were the only evidence that could save Ethan and expose years of systematic abuse disguised as medical treatment and parental protection. She had to escape. She had to survive long enough to get those photographs to authorities who could investigate and prosecute this conspiracy. But Benjamin Cross stood between her and every exit from the study, and in his cold grey eyes she could see the calculating intelligence of a predator who had already planned every aspect of her elimination. The syringe in Benjamin's hand caught the moonlight like a promise of oblivion, but Maya's years, working emergency rooms in Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods, had taught her that survival often depended on split-second decisions that separated victims from survivors. Without hesitation, she hurled her phone toward the tall window with all the strength her adrenaline-fueled muscles could provide, the device shattering the antique glass in an explosion of sound that shattered the mansion's midnight silence like a gunshot. The security alarm's piercing wail filled the study as Benjamin lunged forward, but Maya was already moving, using the massive desk as a barrier between herself and the man who had murdered his own wife to protect his monstrous secret. Her nursing training had included self-defense courses specifically designed for healthcare workers who might encounter violent patients or family members, and every lesson came flooding back as she fought for her life. "You stupid little bitch!" Benjamin snarled, his cultured facade finally cracking to reveal the predator that had always lurked beneath his polished exterior. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? The neighbors, the security company, the police, they'll all be here within minutes, and you've destroyed 8 years of careful planning with your pathetic attempt at heroism." But Maya was already moving toward the study's second exit, a door that led to the mansion's library and offered potential access to the main staircase. Her phone might be destroyed, but the photographs had been automatically backed up to her cloud storage account, and she'd forwarded copies to her sister Carmen with instructions to contact authorities if she didn't check in by morning. The mansion's layout worked in her favor as she raced through interconnected rooms filled with priceless artwork and antique furniture that became obstacles in Benjamin's pursuit. Behind her, she could hear him shouting into his own phone, presumably contacting the security company to cancel the alarm response, but the damage was already done. The broken window and triggered sensors had created a situation that would require explanation, documentation, and official reports that would be difficult to falsify even with Benjamin's wealth and connections. Maya reached the main staircase and bounded up the marble steps 3 at a time, her destination clear in her mind even as her heart hammered with terror and determination in equal measure. If Benjamin Cross had spent 8 years imprisoning his son through pharmaceutical abuse, then Ethan represented both the greatest evidence of that crime and the victim most in need of immediate rescue. The boy's bedroom was located in the mansion's east wing, deliberately isolated from the main living areas in what Benjamin described as therapeutic separation from overstimulating environments. Maya had visited the room twice during her employment, both times noting the hospital-like sterility and the complete absence of toys, books, or any other items that might suggest a normal child lived there. She found Ethan exactly where she expected, lying motionless in his narrow bed, surrounded by medical monitoring equipment that tracked his vital signs and recorded any deviations from expected patterns. The boy appeared to be deeply unconscious, his breathing slow and regular in the artificial rhythm of pharmaceutical sedation. But Maya had learned not to trust appearances when it came to the Cross family's carefully constructed deceptions. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, gently shaking his shoulder while keeping one ear focused on the sounds of Benjamin's pursuit echoing through the mansion's corridors. "I know you can hear me. And I know you understand what's happening. We need to get out of here right now before your father does something we can't undo." The boy's eyes opened slowly, and for the first time since Maya had met him, she saw clear, focused intelligence looking back at her without the fog of medication clouding his awareness. His voice, when he spoke, was weak from disuse, but unmistakably articulate for an 8-year-old, who had supposedly never developed normal language skills. "Are you here to save me?" he asked, the question carrying weight that no child should have to bear. "I've been waiting so long for someone to understand that I'm not what he pretends I am." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes as she helped Ethan sit up, her hands working quickly to disconnect the monitoring wires that would alert Benjamin to any changes in his son's vital signs. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here to save you. But we need to move quickly because your father is very dangerous and he's going to try to stop us." "I know," Ethan replied, with the calm acceptance of someone who had lived with constant fear for most of his life. "He killed my mommy because she wanted to take me to doctors who would tell the truth about what I can do. He thinks I don't remember, but I remember everything. The drugs make it hard to think, but they don't make me forget." Audition. The sound of footsteps on the main staircase sent Maya into overdrive as she scooped Ethan into her arms, surprised by how light he felt after years of inadequate nutrition disguised as specialized dietary requirements for autistic children. The boy wrapped his thin arms around her neck with desperate strength, and she could feel him trembling with a mixture of fear and hope that broke her heart. "There's a servant's staircase at the back of the house," Ethan whispered against her ear, his knowledge of the mansion's layout proving that he'd been far more aware of his surroundings than anyone realized. "It goes down to the kitchen, and there's a door that leads to the garden. If we can get outside, the gardener's shed has tools we could use to break the fence." Maya was amazed by the clarity of his thinking and the sophistication of his escape planning, evidence that beneath the pharmaceutical fog, Ethan Cross possessed intelligence that had been systematically suppressed for nearly his entire life. As they moved through the mansion's darkened hallways, she began to understand why Benjamin had been so determined to keep his son drugged into compliance. The servants' staircase was narrow and steep, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, but it provided the concealment they needed as Benjamin's voice echoed through the main areas of the house. He was shouting into his phone again, and Maya caught fragments of conversation that chilled her blood with their implications. "Yes, I need the Morrison cleanup protocol activated immediately," Benjamin was saying to someone on the other end of the line. "We have a security breach that threatens the entire operation, and I need it resolved before sunrise. Use whatever methods are necessary, but make sure there are no loose ends that can be traced back to our arrangement." So, they reached the kitchen without detection, a massive room equipped with professional-grade appliances that had barely been used since the household staff had been reduced to a skeleton crew years earlier. Maya set Ethan down carefully, noting how he immediately moved with purpose toward the door that led to the garden, his movements no longer constrained by the listless shuffle that characterized his public persona. "The alarm system has motion sensors in the garden," Ethan explained in a whisper, his knowledge of the mansion's security systems revealing just how much he'd observed during his years of supposed unawareness. "But there's a blind spot near the old oak tree where the branches block the sensors. If we stay low and move along the hedge line, we can reach the garden shed without triggering any alerts." Maya marveled at the boy's tactical thinking, realizing that Benjamin's greatest mistake had been underestimating his son's intelligence and awareness. Ethan had spent 8 years cataloging every detail of his prison, waiting for an opportunity to use that knowledge for escape. The garden door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, and the night air felt like freedom as they stepped outside into a world that Ethan hadn't experienced without pharmaceutical restraints since he was barely 2 years old. Maya could see the wonder in his eyes as he breathed deeply, his senses fully engaged for the first time in years. They moved across the manicured lawn with the stealth of commandos, using Ethan's knowledge of the security blind spots to avoid detection while approaching the garden shed that represented their only hope of reaching the outside world. Behind them, the mansion's windows blazed with light as Benjamin conducted a room-by-room search for his escaped prisoners. The shed door was locked, but Ethan pointed to a loose board near the foundation that could be pried away to create an opening large enough for both of them to crawl through. Inside, gardening tools and maintenance equipment provided potential weapons and escape aids, including a pair of heavy bolt cutters that could slice through the ornate iron fence surrounding the property. "Once we're outside the fence, we need to reach the main road," Maya said, her mind racing through possible scenarios and escape routes. "I have a friend who lives about 2 miles from here, someone who can help us contact the right authorities and get you the protection you need." But even as they worked to cut through the fence, Maya knew that their real challenge was just beginning. Benjamin Cross had wealth, connections, and 8 years of carefully constructed documentation that supported his version of events. Proving that he'd systematically abused his son would require more than just her testimony and a few photographs. They would need Ethan himself to testify about his experiences, to demonstrate his true capabilities and expose the lies that had imprisoned him for most of his life. But that would mean putting an 8-year-old child through legal proceedings against a father who had already proven capable of murder to protect his secrets. As the fence wire parted under the bolt cutter's sharp jaws, Maya made a silent promise to the brave little boy who had trusted her with his freedom. Whatever it took, however long the fight might last, she would make sure that Ethan Cross finally got the chance to live the childhood that had been stolen from him. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds, and some children deserved champions who would never give up. The safe house that Maya's sister Carmen had arranged was a modest ranch home in suburban Oak Park, deliberately unremarkable and chosen specifically because it belonged to a retired FBI agent named Margaret Chen, who specialized in witness protection cases involving endangered children. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan Cross was sleeping without pharmaceutical restraints, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous, as his natural intelligence emerged from the fog that had clouded his mind for most of his life. Dr. Zara Peterson, a pediatric neurologist from Rush University Medical Center, had volunteered to conduct an emergency evaluation of Ethan's condition after Carmen explained the circumstances of his rescue. What she discovered during that first examination would become crucial evidence in the legal battle that was about to unfold. "His cognitive function is remarkable," Dr. Peterson explained to Maya as they watched Ethan work on puzzles that were designed for children several years older than his chronological age. "Not only is he demonstrating intelligence well above average for an 8-year-old, but he's showing signs of what we might classify as exceptional analytical capabilities. The fact that he maintained this level of cognitive function despite years of antipsychotic medications suggests a level of neurological resilience that's extremely rare." Over the course of 3 days, Ethan's true personality began to emerge as the pharmaceutical fog lifted from his system. He was articulate, curious, emotionally sophisticated, and possessed of a memory that had catalogued every detail of his imprisonment with photographic precision. More disturbing still, he demonstrated what could only be described as intuitive psychological insights that allowed him to read people's emotions and motivations with uncanny accuracy. "I always knew when Daddy was lying," Ethan told Dr. Peterson during one of their recorded sessions, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth. "He would think he was sad about my condition, but inside he felt satisfied, like when people get something they really wanted, but know they're not supposed to have it. Mommy felt different. She felt guilty and scared, like she knew something bad was happening but didn't know how to stop it." The recordings would prove invaluable when federal investigators began building their case against Benjamin Cross. But Maya knew that the legal system moved slowly, while Benjamin's resources and connections allowed him to work quickly to cover his tracks and eliminate threats to his carefully constructed empire of lies. Carmen had used her connections in the social services system to trigger an emergency investigation by the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, but preliminary reports suggested that Benjamin had already begun implementing damage control measures that cast doubt on Maya's credibility and mental stability. "He's claiming that you kidnapped Ethan during a psychotic episode triggered by your failure to properly administer his medications," Carmen explained during a secure video call from her downtown Chicago office. "He's produced medical documentation suggesting that you've been struggling with substance abuse issues and that your nursing license should be reviewed for professional misconduct." Maya felt her stomach clench with recognition of Benjamin's tactical sophistication. He was using the same strategies that had allowed him to maintain Ethan's imprisonment for 8 years, creating official documentation that supported his version of events while discrediting anyone who challenged his authority or questioned his motives. He's also retained Morrison and Associates, one of Chicago's most expensive criminal defense firms, Carmen continued, her expression grim as she delivered more bad news. "They're already filing motions to have Ethan returned to his father's custody on the grounds that he's being held illegally by people with no parental authority or legal standing to make decisions about his medical care." The legal complexity was staggering, but Maya had expected Benjamin to use every resource at his disposal to maintain control of the situation. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly he would move to eliminate the evidence of his conspiracy, including the people who possessed knowledge that could destroy him. Dr. Peterson had insisted on conducting Ethan's evaluations at an undisclosed location with private security, understanding that Benjamin Cross represented a direct threat to anyone involved in exposing his crimes. But even with these precautions, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted by someone with unlimited resources and a willingness to use any methods necessary to protect his secrets. The breakthrough came on their 4th day in hiding, when Ethan demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond exceptional intelligence or remarkable memory. During a routine psychological evaluation designed to assess his emotional state, the boy began describing details about Dr. Peterson's personal life that he couldn't possibly have known through normal means. "Your daughter is worried about her math test tomorrow," Ethan said casually while working on a jigsaw puzzle, his tone suggesting that he was simply making conversation rather than revealing impossible knowledge. "She's been studying multiplication tables, but she's afraid she'll forget them when the teacher is watching. You want to help her, but you're worried that too much assistance will make her dependent on you instead of building her own confidence." Dr. Peterson nearly dropped her clipboard, her professional composure cracking as she stared at the 8-year-old boy who had just described a conversation she'd had with her 10-year-old daughter that very morning. There was no possible way Ethan could have overheard that discussion or gained access to information about her family's private concerns. "How did you know that?" Dr. Peterson asked, her voice barely steady as she tried to process what she'd just witnessed. "How could you possibly know anything about my daughter's schoolwork or my concerns about helping her study?" Ethan looked up from his puzzle with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a confused adult. "I can see what people are feeling and thinking when they're worried or scared or sad. It's like they have colors around them that show what's happening inside their heads. Daddy said I was sick and dangerous because I could do that, and that's why I needed the medicine to make the colors go away." Maya felt a chill run down her spine as the full implications of Ethan's revelation became clear. Benjamin hadn't just been imprisoning his son to collect insurance money and disability payments. He'd been suppressing what appeared to be genuine psychic abilities that would have attracted attention from researchers, government agencies, and other parties who might want to study or exploit Ethan's extraordinary capabilities. The medicine made everything foggy and quiet, Ethan continued, returning to his puzzle with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. But I could still see the colors sometimes, especially when people were really upset or scared. Daddy's colors were always angry and satisfied at the same time, like he was happy about being able to control something that other people couldn't control. Dr. Peterson exchanged glances with Maya, both women recognizing that they were dealing with something that went far beyond conventional child abuse or even medical fraud. If Ethan truly possessed the abilities he was describing, then Benjamin's motivation for keeping him drugged and isolated took on dimensions that were almost too disturbing to contemplate. "Sweetheart," Maya said carefully, kneeling beside Ethan's chair, "can you tell me what colors you see around me right now?" Ethan studied her with the focused attention of someone conducting a scientific experiment, his young face serious as he processed whatever information his unusual senses were providing. "You have blue and gold colors, which means you care about helping people, but you're scared about what might happen if you can't protect them. And there's some red mixed in, which means you're angry about what Daddy did to me and what he might try to do to other people." The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling, but Maya found herself believing that this extraordinary child possessed capabilities that most people would dismiss as impossible. More importantly, she began to understand why Benjamin had been so desperate to keep those abilities hidden from the world. "There are people who would want to use you if they knew what you could do," Maya said, her nurse's training helping her remain calm despite the revolutionary implications of what she was witnessing. "Your father may have been trying to protect you from them, but the methods he used were wrong and harmful. You have the right to develop your abilities safely with people who care about your well-being rather than what you can do for them." But even as she spoke those reassuring words, Maya knew that their situation had become exponentially more dangerous. If Benjamin Cross had been willing to murder his wife and attempt to kill Maya to protect a simple insurance fraud, what would he do to maintain control over a child whose abilities could revolutionize human understanding of consciousness and perception? The safe house suddenly felt like a temporary shelter in a storm that was about to become a hurricane, and Maya realized that saving Ethan Cross would require resources and allies that she wasn't sure existed in a world where truth was often less powerful than money and influence. But looking at the brave little boy who had survived 8 years of pharmaceutical imprisonment while maintaining his essential humanity and extraordinary gifts, Maya knew that the fight was worth whatever sacrifices it might demand. Some children were worth moving heaven and earth to protect, regardless of whether heaven and earth wanted to be moved. Federal agent Rebecca Martinez had seen enough child abuse cases during her 15 years with the FBI to believe that nothing could still shock her. But the evidence that Maya Rodriguez had provided changed everything she thought she understood about the intersection of wealth, power, and parental control. The photographs from Benjamin Cross's study, combined with Dr. Peterson's detailed psychological evaluations of Ethan, painted a picture of systematic abuse so sophisticated and long-term that it represented an entirely new category of crime. "We've been investigating the Cross family finances for 6 weeks now," Agent Martinez explained to Maya during a secure meeting at the Chicago FBI field office, her tone carrying the weight of discoveries that would reshape multiple federal investigations. "What you uncovered about the insurance policies and disability payments was just the tip of the iceberg. Benjamin Cross has been operating what amounts to a human trafficking ring, but instead of selling children to other people, he's been collecting them to exploit their unusual abilities for his own financial and personal gain." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow, her stomach clenching as she realized that Ethan's situation was not an isolated case of parental abuse, but part of a larger conspiracy that had victimized multiple children over an extended period. "How many others are there?" she asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full scope of Benjamin's crimes. "At least 12 children over the past decade, possibly more," Agent Martinez replied, opening a thick file that contained photographs and documents that told stories of systematic exploitation disguised as specialized medical care. Cross has been identifying children with exceptional abilities, advanced intelligence, unusual sensory capabilities, what some researchers might classify as psychic phenomena, and acquiring them through private adoptions, custody arrangements, or outright purchases from desperate families. The files detailed a network of corrupt medical professionals, legal advisors, and financial institutions that had collaborated to create and maintain elaborate deceptions around each child's condition and care requirements. Dr. Morrison had been just one member of a larger conspiracy that included pediatricians, psychologists, social workers, and even judges who had been either bribed or blackmailed into supporting Benjamin's activities. The children are kept in pharmaceutical fog to suppress their abilities while generating income through insurance policies, disability payments, medical research grants, and private contracts with organizations that want to study exceptional human capabilities, Agent Martinez continued, her professional composure barely containing her obvious disgust at the scope of the conspiracy. Cross has been essentially farming these children, harvesting their potential for profit while destroying their lives in the process. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she processed the magnitude of Benjamin's crimes and the suffering he had inflicted on innocent children whose only mistake was being born with extraordinary gifts. "Where are the other children now? Are they safe?" "We've located 7 of them in various facilities across the Midwest, all maintained under similar conditions to what Ethan experienced," Agent Martinez explained. 3 others died during their captivity, officially from complications related to their documented disabilities, but more likely from pharmaceutical overdoses or deliberate neglect. 2 children are still unaccounted for, and we believe Cross may have eliminated them when they became too difficult to control or too likely to expose his operations. The federal investigation had been triggered by Maya's evidence, but it had quickly expanded to involve multiple agencies as the full scope of Benjamin's criminal enterprise became apparent. The conspiracy involved wire fraud, insurance fraud, medical malpractice, child abuse, human trafficking, tax evasion, money laundering, and at least 5 murders that could be directly attributed to Benjamin's efforts to protect his operations. Cross is currently in federal custody, but his legal team is fighting extradition to Illinois, where the most serious charges have been filed, Agent Martinez continued. They're claiming that he was operating a legitimate medical research facility and that all of his actions were authorized by proper medical authorities and legal guardians. The pharmaceutical companies that supplied the medications are claiming they had no knowledge of how their products were being used. Maya understood that the legal battle would be complex and prolonged, with Benjamin's wealth and connections providing him with advantages that most criminals never possessed. But she also knew that the evidence against him was overwhelming, and the testimonies of surviving children would be impossible for any jury to dismiss. "What about Ethan?" Maya asked, her primary concern focused on the brave little boy who had trusted her with his freedom and his life. "How is he adjusting to normal life, and what kind of support will he need going forward?" Agent Martinez's expression softened as she shifted to discussing the positive aspects of their investigation's outcomes. "Ethan is doing remarkably well, all things considered. He's been placed with a foster family that specializes in caring for children with exceptional needs, and he's receiving counseling to help him process his experiences while learning to use his abilities in healthy ways. The foster family had been carefully selected by federal social workers who understood that Ethan's psychic capabilities required specialized understanding and support. His foster parents were both retired educators who had experience working with gifted children, and they lived in a secure location that would protect Ethan from anyone who might want to exploit his abilities for their own purposes. "He's been asking about you constantly," Agent Martinez added, with the first smile Maya had seen from her during their meeting. "He credits you with saving his life, and he wants to make sure you know that he's using his abilities to help other children who are in dangerous situations. The counselors say his empathic capabilities are helping them identify and rescue other victims of similar abuse." Maya felt a mixture of pride and concern as she processed this information, understanding that Ethan's extraordinary gifts could indeed be used to help others, but worried about the psychological burden such responsibilities might place on a child who was still recovering from years of traumatic abuse. "Will I be able to see him again?" she asked, knowing that witness protection protocols and ongoing legal proceedings might limit contact between them. "I know it might not be safe or appropriate, but he's been through so much, and I want him to know that someone will always care about his well-being." "Actually," Agent Martinez said, reaching into her briefcase to retrieve an official-looking document, "Ethan has specifically requested that you be considered as a potential adoptive parent when the legal proceedings are complete. His foster family supports this request, and our psychological evaluations suggest that maintaining your relationship would be beneficial for his long-term recovery and development." Maya felt her heart leap with joy and terror in equal measure, understanding that adopting Ethan would mean accepting responsibility for protecting and nurturing a child whose abilities made him valuable to people who might stop at nothing to acquire that value for themselves. But she also knew that she loved this brave, extraordinary boy and would do whatever was necessary to give him the normal childhood that had been stolen from him. "The other children we've rescued are also recovering well," Agent Martinez concluded, closing the files that documented years of systematic abuse and exploitation. "Several of them have abilities similar to Ethan's, and we're working with specialized programs to help them develop their gifts in safe, supportive environments. Your decision to investigate Ethan's condition and expose Benjamin's crimes has literally saved dozens of lives and prevented countless future victims." Maya left the FBI field office with a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that the fight for Ethan's future was far from over. Benjamin Cross still had resources and allies who might continue to pose threats, and there would always be other people who might want to exploit Ethan's abilities for their own purposes. But she also carried with her the memory of a brave 8-year-old boy who had survived years of pharmaceutical imprisonment while maintaining his essential humanity and extraordinary compassion. Ethan Cross had been born with gifts that made him valuable to predators, but he had also been born with a strength that made him impossible to truly defeat. Some children were destined to change the world, and Maya Rodriguez had been privileged to help one of them find his freedom. The story of Ethan Cross was far from over, but for the first time in 8 years, it was a story being written by the child himself rather than by the people who wanted to control him. And that, Maya understood, made all the difference in the world. If you want a part 2 of this story, leave it in the comments.